Tyler's a fascinating young man, and he has a lot of strengths. He's clearly on the high-functioning side of the autism spectrum, and he has what we call savant skills, which happen in 5 to 10% of people with autism. And what I mean by savant skill is a very deep and narrow skill set that is unusual in its ability. And in Tyler's case, what we observe today is his ability to recognize chime sounds and identify which chimes are being played. And his fascination with chimes in general would be considered a very narrow but very interesting focus. Savant skills are very narrow abilities that can occur in an autism population, but can also occur with other people that are not classified as autistic. About 50% of people who are considered savants are autistic. And what a savant skill is a very narrow, very high level of knowledge, in contrast to developmental disabilities. So it's different than being a genius, because a very brilliant person would have a much more even profile of strengths and weaknesses. But with a savant skill, the person has to have deficit areas as well. So this particular talent stands out in stark contrast to the rest of their functioning level. And we see savant skills typically in the arts, music, the visual arts, mathematics. The right hemisphere of the brain is usually involved, and there are often behaviors and talents that the person likes to repeat over and over again. So in my program, some of the savant skills that I've come in contact with are calendar counting, which is the ability to know the day of the week, of any month, of any year, or to memorize birthdays or other historical facts that might have some significance in history. I have students that have memorized the 800 phone book. I have students who can hear a piece of music one time and perform it. I have a student who draws the astronomical configurations that are over a picture that she has drawn based on the longitude and latitude of the photograph on the day that she painted the picture. One of the things that we see often with children with autism is what we call splinter skills, which are areas of strength relative to areas of weakness. For instance, we have students that can perform mathematical calculations very well, but they can't apply those mathematical calculations to math in the real world. So necessarily making change at the grocery store, for instance. That would be a splinter skill, to be able to perform the actual math computations, but not be able to use the math in a real-world situation. Or to be able to sight read years above their chronologic age, but not understand the information they're reading. On the other hand, a savant skill is a very narrow skill that is of tremendous difference to the neurotypical population. It's an area of genius, one might say, without functioning on a high level in other areas. I can say something curious about his savant skill, which is typical of people with autism, is it's how narrow it is. For instance, he doesn't have, so far, any demonstrated musical ability. We don't know if he has perfect pitch or not. He isn't showing any interest in playing any music. He strictly loves the sound of the chimes and is able to recognize all the chime sounds that he hears. Not only is he interested in the sounds of the chimes and the names associated, but all the factual information surrounding the chimes, like when they were first invented, when they were discontinued, what company made them. Savant skills only occur in 5 to 10% of people with autism, which means 95% of people with autism do not have special savant skills. They have a lot of neurologic differences, but that doesn't mean that they can't be productive members of society. And what education should do is focus on building their strengths, because people with autism do not have a flat learning profile. They have a profile where there are strengths as well as weaknesses. And, we're very excited, for instance, in our program now about the use of iPads, because we have been able to develop augmentative communication systems that can help nonverbal students speak orally. And, that opens incredible doors for them. And in general, I think society needs to tolerate, accept, and embrace individual differences much more deeply than we currently do. And with autism, the good news that has come with the increased frequency of it is there is now a greater understanding of autism, and I think a greater fascination with it. And also, happily, a lot more research dollars dedicated to trying to understand the cure for autism, the cures that might be available, the causes, which will be many, because it's not it's a multi-causal disability. It's not caused by a single factor. And the best educational techniques to help a child learn. And in my program, that's what we focus on, and we were very excited with the research-based techniques we're using and the exciting results we're getting. Well, I've never met a student with autism that had his particular passion for chimes. So that was the first thing that I found very interesting about Tyler. The second thing I found interesting about Tyler is that often when you see a person with a savant skill, they're really obsessed by it. And they sort of live and breathe this interest to the exclusion of most other things. And after talking to his parents, I learned that he has several interests that he's very involved with, and chimes are his number 2 interest. Japanese anime is currently his number 1. But what they were telling me is that he's a much more flexible thinker than a lot of people that I know with autism are. And he, changes his interests. He researches his interests independently and broadens them. And those are important characteristics, I think, for his future, that he has, the flexibility to change his interests. So that excited me a lot. He also was very calm. Even though he has a high activity level, he wasn't anxious. And you often see anxiety as a comorbid condition with autism, and that's one of the reasons people with autism have a desire for sameness, because they don't really understand perceptually the world around them the way a neurotypical brain would. And so the more repetition there is, the calmer they feel. And I didn't see that with Tyler at all. And that was very exciting to see him be so comfortable in front of the camera, so comfortable in this strange environment, so comfortable with everyone looking at him. He's a natural star. One of the characteristics of autism that I noticed with Tyler is his lack of social reciprocity, which means the give and take of conversations. He had very little interest in who I was, or what I was doing there. He was very happy to tell me about his interests and answered my questions very politely, but he didn't expand on the conversation. He didn't make very much eye contact. He didn't seem to be particularly related to many of the people that he's met. He was very interested in Gary and how Gary was doing with the tests particularly. But in terms of his relationship with me, I doubt that I had any significance, to him whatsoever. And that's pretty typical of a relationship, a superficial relationship with a person with autism. I'm sure if we were working together and I was his teacher or his babysitter, or we had a reoccurrent relationship, we would have much more of a meaningful relationship. But it would still be probably fairly egocentric. And in that way, he was pretty typical. So I'm often asked by parents, what is the future for my child going to be? And I always answer the same way, which is there is no crystal ball. There's no way to know for sure. But when you have a child like Tyler, who's on the high end of the autism spectrum, we already know he's doing well in his academic subjects in school. We certainly know that he's got parents that support him tremendously, and that he's got passionate areas of interest that he becomes extremely well informed about. Those are pretty good signs that the future is a bright one for Tyler. And again, no crystal ball here, but I would imagine higher education, and I think future employment by Woodstock Chimes.